Unit 2-3. Purpose. Focus. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and an academic advisor.
Hi, Greg. Do you have a minute?
Nicole, hello. I have about 20 minutes. Come in and sit down.
Thanks. I wanted to talk about the school psychology program. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I've decided to change my major to counseling.
Really? It's quite a change from being an accountant to being a counselor.
I know. It's funny, isn't it? All my life I thought I wanted to run my own business someday. But this year I've been working as a volunteer tutor at Garfield Elementary, and I'm just so impressed with what the counselors are doing there.
Did you say Garfield?
Yes, where those kids in the accident went to school. That was terrible, that accident. It was such a shock to the whole school, but it was eye-opening for me. I had a chance to observe some of the counselors talking to the kids, helping them deal with the tragedy. The counselors, that is, they were they were really amazing. It really got me thinking about how to help people heal. I started thinking, this is something I'd like to do.
Now choose the best answer to each question. Number 1. Why does the student go to see her advisor? Number 2. What is the student's attitude toward the school counselors that she observed? Exercise 2-3, questions 1 through 2. Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Park?
Hello, Tony. How can I help you?
Professor Park, I have a problem. My father had to have surgery, and I have to go to Oklahoma. I don't know how long I'll be gone. I was wondering if I could take an incomplete for your class.
I'm so sorry to hear about your father. Of course you can take a grade of incomplete. It means you would have 6 weeks to make up the term paper and the final exam. There is also a form that you need to fill out that I have to sign.
I've got the form right here.
Oh, then why don't we take care of it right now?
Number 1. Why does the student go to see his professor? Number 2. What is required for an incomplete? Questions 3 through 5. Listen to a part of a conversation that takes place in the Student Services Office of a university.
Excuse me, I'm looking for Janice.
I'm Janice. What can I do for you?
The cashier in the cafeteria sent me here. I'd like to change my meal plan.
What plan do you have now?
2 meals a day, breakfast and dinner. But I have an early morning class 3 days a week, and I don't have time to eat breakfast in the cafeteria.
What? No breakfast? That's not good.
Oh, I still eat. We take turns bringing donuts or bagels to have at the break.
I'm glad to hear it. So what you have now is plan B, and what did you want to do?
Well, I was thinking of switching to dinner only, if I can do that, and get a refund for the breakfast I don't eat.
Do you know about plan C?
Plan C?
It's for lunch and dinner and costs only $20 more than plan B.
Oh, really? That sounds like a good deal.
Number 3. What is the purpose of the conversation? Number 4. Why does the woman say this?
What? No breakfast? That's not good.
Number 5. Why does the woman tell the man about Plan C? Questions 6 through 7. Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Curtis, may I ask you something?
Of course.
My daughter was sick yesterday, and I had to stay home with her. I was wondering, could I make up the quiz?
I usually don't do that for quizzes, only for tests.
But I'm concerned this will affect my grade. I need to do well in this class.
Then I've got an idea. If you want to show me what you've learned, give me a one-page report summarizing the most important thing you got out of the chapter.
Oh, I can do that. That's even better than a quiz. Thank you, Professor Curtis.
Number 6. Why does the student speak to the professor? Number 7. What does the professor suggest the student do? Questions 8 through 10. Listen to a telephone conversation between two graduate students.
Hello?
Leona, this is Jasper.
Hi. I've been waiting for you to call. Could you get Dr. Bryant for next week?
Dr. Bryant is on sabbatical, but Professor Slocum says he'd be happy to visit our class.
I don't know Professor Slocum.
He's an expert on the natural history of the region and has written several books on the topic. I think he'll be an excellent addition to our seminar.
Good work, Jasper. This assignment to invite a guest speaker has turned out to be harder than I thought.
But it's a great assignment, and besides, everyone has to do it. Look at all the professional contacts we're making.
You're right. It's very useful. Thanks again, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Number 8. What are the speakers mainly discussing? Number 9. Why does the man say this?
He's an expert on the natural history of the region and has written several books on the topic. I think he'll be an excellent addition to our seminar.
Number 10. What is the man's opinion of the assignment? Exercise 2, questions 1 through 2. Listen to part of a discussion in a writing class.
You probably noticed in your reading for this week that all the stories involved cases of miscommunication between people. You probably also noticed that a lot of this miscommunication was due to cultural differences. This is all good stuff, and so I thought it would be a good idea if this week's journal theme were along the same lines. What I'd like you to do is think and write about a time when you, or someone you know, experienced some type of miscommunication. It could be any kind of problem in conveying or in understanding. Yes?
But isn't this the same topic as last week? I mean, I feel I've already written a lot about it. I had to do something like this in 2 of my other classes. Too. Can't we write about something else for a change?
What did you have in mind?
I mean, I'm getting tired of writing about my life, and I don't feel qualified to write about any of my friends' problems.
Then why not focus on someone you don't know personally? For example, a scene in a movie or a television show.
Oh, I can do that?
Of course. What's important is your awareness of that you can recognize instances of miscommunication.
Number 1. What is the main purpose of the discussion? Number 2. What is the woman's attitude toward the assignment? Questions 3 through 6. Listen to part of a talk in a United States history class. The professor is talking about economics in colonial New England.
We know that in colonial New England, the Native Americans, compared to the European colonists, had a far greater knowledge of what resources in the environment could be eaten or made useful. Native Americans used a wide range of resources for economic subsistence, and these resources were simply used by the family that acquired them. Only a few resources were accumulated for the purpose of showing a person's social status. For example, shells, furs, and ornaments of the hunt.
Excuse me, Dr. Singer, but did the Native Americans have a concept of wealth?
The Native Americans believed a person's status came more from kinship and personal alliances than from stores of wealth. Their definition of need was what they needed to survive. So if they had food, clothing, and shelter, they considered themselves wealthy. For the European colonists, on the other hand, resources in the environment were seen more as commodities, as goods that could be exchanged in markets. European economies measured commodities in terms of money values, abstract equivalencies that could be accumulated and could function as indicators of wealth and social status. So for the colonists, need was defined by the markets that bought New England goods. So the Europeans perceived few resources in New England ecosystems, but they saw many commodities, fur, fish, timber, which could be sold in the marketplace for profit.
Number 3. What is the main purpose of the talk? Number 4. What does the professor say about the Native Americans' use of resources? Number 5. Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Excuse me, Dr. Singer, but did the Native Americans have a concept of wealth?
The Native Americans believed a person's status came more from kinship and personal alliances than from stores of wealth. Their definition of need was what they needed to survive. So if they had food, clothing, and shelter, they considered themselves wealthy.
Why does the professor say this?
So if they had food, clothing, and shelter, they considered themselves wealthy.
Number 6. Why does the professor say this?
So the Europeans perceived few resources in New England ecosystems, but they saw many commodities, fur, fish, timber, which could be sold in the marketplace for profit.
Questions 7 through 10. Listen to part of a talk in an anthropology class. The professor is discussing culture.
What would human life be without culture? It's impossible for us to imagine what we'd be like without language, without art or religion or technology. Over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, these aspects of our cultures have become as much a part of us as our anatomy and physiology. We have a lot in common with the people around us. In fact, the number of ideas we have in common with nearby people is very large. A complete list of shared ideas, for example, ideas we share with the people around us, this list would include our ideas about what's right and wrong, what's beautiful and ugly, and so on. Also, our ideas about food, work, love, marriage, every aspect of our lives. Even our rules about how to behave toward strangers, friends, animals, and the earth. Think of a particular group of people, any group, say, for example, college students. If you could take all the ideas and behaviors, all the tools and technology, all the things that college students share as a result of being in contact with each other, you'd have what anthropologists call student culture.
So what you're saying is culture is sort of like a club. College students are a club. It's because our experience is like we go to class, we do homework, we have our computers and cell phones, we hang out with other students. Sometimes we forget what the outside world is like. This is what we have in common with other students. It's why our culture makes us feel like part of a club, right?
Well, in a way, a culture is like a club. Neighboring cultures might share the same ideas and rules like neighboring clubs do. But the comparison doesn't completely cut it. Think about it. A club has borders that we can define, but we run into trouble if we try to draw borders around a culture. Culture isn't a thing, it's an idea. Still, even though the idea of culture is problematic, some of us believe that by continuing to study cultures, we will eventually be able to explain the similarities and differences among us.
Number 7. What is the purpose of the talk? Number 8. Why does the professor mention student culture? Number 9. What is the woman's attitude toward a student culture? Number 10. What does the professor think of comparing a culture to a club? Exercise 2-3, questions 1 through 2. Listen to part of a talk in a business management class.
Management requires a great deal of energy and effort, more than most people care to make. One factor that affects managers and inhibits their capacity to provide leadership is stress. Stress has lots of causes: work overload, criticism from workers, and can have negative health effects, including loss of sleep. It's a fact. Managers have to deal with stress. Some handle it by making time to be by themselves. Most have some favorite place or pastime, a beach to walk on, maybe a stream to fish in, or a game to play with the kids. It's important to have some form of rest and relaxation. Creating art, working with your hands, gardening, playing sports, the list goes on. Rest doesn't always mean inactivity. For some people, exercise is rest.
Number 1. What is the main purpose of the talk? Number 2. What is the professor's opinion of rest? Questions 3 through 6. Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class. The professor is talking about clinical psychology.
In order to know how behavior patterns can be changed, the clinical psychologist has to know what causes the client to behave the way he or she does. Identifying the cause is called diagnosis. In diagnosis, a psychologist uses 2 basic tools: interviews and psychological tests. Through interviews and tests, the psychologist tries to classify the problem to see if it falls into any known categories. A psychologist may also attempt to describe the client's personality in terms of how he or she deals with life. For example, some people like to lead, and some prefer to follow the lead of others. Some people are active and outgoing, while others are quiet and reflective. In a diagnostic interview, the psychologist takes the client's case history. This means learning how the client got along with parents, teachers, and friends, as well as how the person handled difficult situations in the past. Psychological testing is the other way that a psychologist tries to diagnose the client's problems. Clinical psychologists have developed tests that can help them learn about a person's intelligence and personality, as well as tests that show whether a person's behavior or perception is influenced by emotions, disabilities, or other factors. Personality testing is useful in discovering how the client tries to adjust to life. Personality tests can reveal unconscious feelings the person is unable to talk about. This information can be important and could help shorten the length of treatment required.
Number 3. What is the purpose of the lecture? Number 4. How do clinical psychologists diagnose a client's problems? Number 5. Why does the professor discuss taking a client's case history? Number 6. According to the professor, why are personality tests useful? Questions 7 through 10. A public health officer has been invited to speak to a biology class. She will be discussing bats. Listen to the beginning of the talk.
Now that the warmer weather and longer days are here, we aren't the only ones spending more time outdoors. This is an active time for bats as well. Migratory bats are now returning to the area, and young bats are starting to explore their environment. Young bats go off course, and this is when most people come into contact with them. Bats are a normal part of our environment and can even be a good thing. Bats help keep down the insect population, especially mosquitoes. Normal bat activity includes sleeping during the daytime and becoming active and flying around in search of food at night, starting at dusk. It's unusual to see a bat during the day. Normal bats don't fly around in the daytime or lie or crawl on the ground. So if you encounter a bat like that, you should call the health department immediately. If you have bats in your attic or house, contact a pest control agency. They do not kill the bats, but make recommendations on how to get the bats out of your home. You'll want to create a one-way valve from your house to outside so they can get out but can't come in. To avoid having bats in your house altogether, find all possible entry points into the house and close them by caulking or screening the gap. Bats can squeeze through a gap of 1/2 inch. Bats are the most likely carriers of rabies in our area, and almost 100% of rabies cases are fatal. Make sure your dogs and cats are vaccinated against rabies. If you should come in physical contact with a bat, it's important to get in touch with the health department or a doctor immediately. If possible, catch the bat so it can be tested for rabies.
Number 7. What is the main purpose of the talk? Number 8. Why does the speaker say this?
Bats help keep down the insect population, especially mosquitoes.
Number 9. How can you prevent bats from entering your house? Number 10. Why does the speaker recommend getting medical advice if you come in physical contact with a bat? Exercise 2-3, questions 1 through 5. Listen to part of a lecture in an anthropology class. The professor is discussing humor and laughter.
Being amused is a condition we're all familiar with, but what exactly is a sense of humor? Well, it's something very personal, and yet we communicate it to others by laughing. Laughter is a universal human expression. All normal human beings can laugh. Children as young as 1 month old will laugh. People often laugh together, and people laugh louder and more frequently when other people around them are also laughing. Every comedian knows this, and research has confirmed it. Physically, laughter is an involuntary tensing of the chest muscles, followed by a rapid inhalation and exhalation of breath, a mechanism that releases tension. For most people, a good laugh is welcome and worth looking for because it brings pleasure and relief. Human adults everywhere in the world enjoy making their children laugh. Adults make playful attacks on their children, tickling, teasing, and even pretending to bite them. Adults will throw small children up in the air and catch them again. This causes the child to experience mild stress, but in a secure setting because the stress is carefully controlled by the parent. And when the child laughs, it's a signal that he or she has successfully dealt with mild feelings of insecurity. This teaches the child about the shocks and fears that are part of human life, and which every human eventually has to deal with. This element of shock in an otherwise safe situation is a universal characteristic of situations where people laugh. Our sense of humor allows us to tell stories about situations we haven't experienced firsthand. We call these little stories jokes. We tell jokes to show our frustration with the society we live in, especially its rules. Social rules and conventions provide us with a range of situations that we can turn into humor. And the things we joke about, the conventions and rules we live by, are sort of tense areas in our society. They're areas where we can see the need for change. Humor gives us the power to think about changing the rules. Making jokes and laughing are safe ways to change our social rules and conventions. Therefore, comedians, whether they know it or not, are agents of social change. The ability to laugh is a vital part of being human. People who laugh together or laugh at each other's jokes feel close to each other. Laughter creates a sense of connection. Humor can also help us deal with anxieties that we can't escape. Failure, fear, pain, and death, they're all real to us, as they are to no other animal on earth. And without a sense of humor, it would be difficult for us to live with everything that we know about the world.
Number 1. According to the professor, why do most people welcome laughter? Number 2. Why does the professor say this?
Adults make playful attacks on their children, tickling, teasing, and even pretending to bite them. Adults will throw small children up in the air and catch them again.
Number 3. Which of the following is a universal characteristic of situations where people laugh? Number 4. Why does the professor talk about social rules and conventions? Number 5. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
The ability to laugh is a vital part of being human. People who laugh together or laugh at each other's jokes feel close to each other. Laughter creates a sense of connection. Humor can also help us deal with anxieties that we can't escape. Failure, fear, pain, and death, they're all real to us, as they are to no other animal on earth. And without a sense of humor, it would be difficult for us to live with everything that we know about the world.
Why does the professor say this?
And without a sense of humor, it would be difficult for us to live with everything that we know about the world.
Questions 6 through 10. Listen to part of a lecture in a horticulture class. The professor is talking about roadside beautification.
There's always been tension throughout our history, a kind of tension between private development and government regulation, especially when it comes to development of land for agriculture. Catherine Parr Traill, a botanist who lived in the 19th century, she predicted that the natural beauty of Canada's wilderness would disappear because of agricultural development. She wrote in 1868 that the wilderness was, quote, destined to be swept away as the onward march of civilization clears away the primeval forest and turns the waste places into fruitful field, unquote. But fortunately for us, Catherine Parr Traill's prediction turned out to be not entirely true. The Quinte Wildflower Project proves that people can come together to preserve the beauty of the wilderness. This project continues a trend to beautify North American highways that goes all the way back to the 1960s and the beginning of the Adopt a Highway programs, the programs that use volunteers to clean up the litter along roadsides. Since the 60s, beautification programs have been broadened to include the planting of native flowers and shrubs. In Canada, a lot of time and money were being spent mowing the grass on roadsides. Weeds and wildflowers alike, all were sprayed with herbicides to kill them off. Eventually, the high cost forced the government to stop spraying and mowing. Since the 1980s, Ontario has turned to volunteers and private sponsors for roadside beautification. The Quinte Wildflower Project is the largest roadside planting of wildflowers in Ontario. The project was born in 1996 with the help of private sponsors and government horticulturists. Areas along an 18-kilometer stretch of Highway 401 from Trenton to Belleville were, most of the sites were planted with one of two native wildflower seed mixtures. Both seed mixtures produce flowers that require little maintenance and are hardy enough to survive roadside conditions. Each seed mixture contains several different species, so wildflowers bloom, so there's a steady show of colors from June to October. The Quinte Wildflower Project has been a huge success. Its greatest success has been in attracting both public interest and private sponsors. It demonstrates that government and citizens can work together, that partnerships between the public and private sectors can and do work.
Number 6. How does the instructor develop the topic of roadside beautification? Number 7. Why does the professor quote botanist Catherine Parr Traill? Number 8. Why does the professor mention the Adopt a Highway programs that began in the 1960s? Number 9. Why does the professor say this?
Each seed mixture contains several different species, so wildflowers bloom, so there's a steady show of colors from June to October.
Number 10. What does the professor think of partnerships between government and private citizens? Quiz 2. 5. Listen to a conversation between two students.
Am I ever glad to see you? We don't have much time left before our presentation, only the rest of this week. Let's talk about what we still need to do.
Do we have that much left to do? I was under the impression we're just about ready. I've got all my data, the graphs and photos of the mountain.
We better go over what we have.
Oh, sure, but I have hockey practice in half an hour.
This won't take long, I hope. Now, I'll do the introduction. First, I'll talk about how the geologists at Volcano Watch detected another tiny earthquake on Stone Peak 2 weeks ago. The quake registered only 0.8, but they think it could be a part of a series of small quakes that precede an eruption. Then I'll give the history of the eruptions in that area.
How far are you going to go back?
2,000 years. That's the last time Stone Peak erupted. I won't go over every little eruption, just the 6 or 7 major ones in the range. Then, I guess at that point I'll turn it over to you.
And I'll show my graphs. No, maybe the pictures first. At least this one of the bulge. George Davidson at the observatory gave me all these photographs. I still have to make slides out of them, and of my graphs too, but that won't take long. Aren't they awesome? Some really good shots of the mountain. You can really see how much the bulge has grown.
It's grown. How much? A few inches?
A few inches a year for the past 6 years. The bulge is forming because a chamber of magma below the surface is growing. The Earth's crust is being bent and bent. A few inches a year is a lot of bending, and sooner or later, it'll start to break open. Then there'll be a show. First, I'll show them the color picture, then the graphs showing the eruptions over the past 6 years, and then the series of black and white photos showing the bulge. It shows up better in black and white.
Then, when you're through with the slides, we should probably allow enough time for questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. That should about wrap it up. See, we're all set to go.
Number 1. What are the students discussing? Number 2. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
We better go over what we have.
Oh, sure, but I have hockey practice in half an hour.
Why does the man say this?
Oh, sure, but I have hockey practice in half an hour.
Number 3. What types of data will the students use in their presentation? Number 4. What is the man's opinion of the photographs? Number 5. According to the man, why is a bulge forming on the mountain? Questions 6 through 10. Listen to part of a talk in an economics class.
One very important institution in our economy is the bank. Banks manage money for individual people, corporations, and the government. Banks provide a number of important services for you and your family. Most importantly, they're a safe place to store your money. They also provide an easy way for you to transfer money from one place to another. When you write a personal check, the check authorizes the bank to give your money to the person or business whose name is on the check. Of course, banks also lend money. Ordinary people take out bank loans for a number of reasons: to pay for college, to buy or remodel a home, to start or expand a business, and so forth. Banks provide these services to individuals. However, their main function is to lend large sums of money, for example, to corporations. When people or corporations borrow money from a bank, they must, of course, pay interest, a percentage of the money they borrowed. Banks pay interest on the money they hold and charge interest on the money they lend. For a bank to make a profit, it has to collect more interest than it pays out. Sometimes banks invest money as well as lend it. To invest money means to put it into a corporation or some other project. For example, building a housing complex or doing medical research in exchange for a share of the profits. Most businesses need loans and investments at some time, and banks are an important source of both. You might wonder what would happen if all the people with money in a bank wanted to take their money out at the same time. I mean, how would the bank be able to give everyone their money if it had lent out or invested most of it? In fact, this can be a serious problem for banks. They count on the fact that most people won't want their money for a long time once it's deposited. That leaves the bank free to lend or invest the money. If every person, or even lots of people, tried to withdraw their money at the same time, the bank might not be able to honor all of its deposits. This causes some banks to fail or go bankrupt. Bank failures used to be common during times of recession or depression. They were especially common during the Great Depression of the 1930s. When Franklin Roosevelt became president in 1933, one of the first things he did was close all the banks so depositors wouldn't panic and try to take all their money out.
Number 6. What is the main purpose of the talk? Number 7. For what reasons do individuals take out bank loans? Number 8. How do banks make a profit? Number 9. Why does the professor say this?
If every person, or even lots of people, tried to withdraw their money at the same time, the bank might not be able to honor all of its deposits.
Number 10. Why were banks closed during the Great Depression of the 1930s? Quiz 3. Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Excuse me, Dr. Kilmer, do you have a minute?
Hello, Darren. Come on in, have a seat. What can I do for you?
Well, it's about my midterm grade for organizational psychology. I'm surprised it's so low. I feel like I've been working pretty hard in this class.
I see. Well, let's go back and have another look at each of your assignments. Here we go. Okay, I've pulled up your record. You had a C on the midterm exam and a B on your first assignment.
Yeah, that was the paper about the interview. I talked to a woman at a bio-research firm.
Yes, I remember that paper. You must have learned some useful things. But unfortunately, Darren, I don't have any record here for the second and third assignments. They were due on October 1st and the 13th.
I know, but I've been sort of busy. My younger brother's starting classes here in January, and I have to show him around and help him find a place to live. He's staying with me for now, but he doesn't have a car, so I have to drive him.
Can't your brother take the bus some of the time? After all, your coursework should be your priority.
It's really hard. He is my brother, and he's had some problems in the past. My parents want me to help him get settled. They live 2,000 miles away.
I see. That does make it tough.
I'd like to... Would it be all right if I made up those two papers? I started the first one, but I just didn't get everything typed up.
Yes, of course you can make up the work, but it would be best if you did that as soon as possible. Remember, these short papers, together with the long-term paper, count for 50% of your final grade.
I know, and I need my final grade to be better than my midterm grade. Don't worry, I'll get it together. I really like this class. I just have to get more organized.
Well, good luck, Darren. I'm glad you came to talk to me.
Thanks, Dr. Kilmer. I appreciate your time.
Number 1. Why does the student speak to his professor? Number 2. What reason does the student give for not completing his assignments? Number 3. When were the assignments due? Number 4. What point does the professor make about the student's work? Number 5. Why does the student say this?
Don't worry, I'll get it together.
Questions 6 through 10. Listen to part of a lecture in a communications class.
Researchers study television to understand its effects on viewers and to measure its effectiveness in selling products. Much of the research on TV audiences is market research, paid for by corporations with something to sell. Let me repeat, research on television is funded largely by advertisers. The television industry depends on advertising money to survive, and this relationship influences what television offers viewers. Advertisers aim to reach mass audiences and specific social groups. In turn, the television industry tries to meet the needs of advertisers, because pleasing the advertisers is nearly as important as pleasing the public. This means advertisers have a lot of control over what programs are made and when they are shown. The American television industry is controlled by people who are more interested in the culture of consumerism than in preserving cultures or natural resources. For the first time in history, most of the stories children learn don't come from their parents or schools. They come from a small number of large corporations with something to sell. And this culture of consumerism is exported to other countries. Television is the most effective marketing tool ever created. Many advertisements apply basic psychology by sort of appealing to our insecurities and desires. Ads convince us that the things we once thought were luxuries are now necessities. Television is highly skilled at creating images of affluence, not just in the ads, but in the programs as well. Using sophisticated market research, programmers and advertisers sort of paint a picture of life centered on material possessions. This kind of life may look glamorous and desirable, but it's all at the expense of personal relationships. As you probably can tell, I tend to agree with critics of the media. Advertising does create false needs, and products we really need don't require advertising. Television promotes consumerism. It shows us things, and more things. It encourages greed and envy. Television helps create a wasteful society, where things are thrown out long before they are worn out.
Number 6. What is the main idea of the lecture? Number 7. According to the professor, why do researchers study television? Number 8. According to the professor, Why do advertisers have control over television programming? Number 9. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Television is highly skilled at creating images of affluence, not just in the ads, but in the programs as well. Using sophisticated market research, programmers and advertisers sort of paint a picture of life centered on material possessions. This kind of life may look glamorous and desirable, but it's all at the expense of personal relationships.
Why does the professor say this?
This kind of life may look glamorous and desirable, but it's all at the expense of personal relationships.
Number 10. What is the professor's opinion of television?